know now. I have 15 minutes to do this, and I was really happy to see that during the talks this morning, that almost all of my programs were already touched upon. So that makes me really happy that our programs are actually being used and getting out there. So, did it go forward? There we go. So we have two long-term monitoring programs that are both about 20 years. We have a seagrass monitoring program in South Florida that Jim is going to talk about next. So I won't focus on Penny's work, but I will talk about our long-term trends in shallow water corals. So our program is called the Coral Reef Evaluation Monitoring Program, CREMP. It has 40 stations in the Florida Keys and 11 in the Dry Tortugas. This map shows the 37 sites that have been consistent since it started in 1996. So you can see it has a wide variety of shallow and deep, and also patch reefs and backcountry reefs. So this is the long-term trends in benthic cover. And you can see that some of them, like zoanthids and zoanthids, have been holding about steady. Stony coral, which is the one that we're focusing on today, started at about 12% in 1996. And keep in mind that in the 60s and 70s, there was about 50 to 60% stony coral cover then. And so as you can see, as of 2016, we're down to about 6%. So that's about a 90% loss of shallow water corals in the Keys over that time. But in our time period, it's been about 50 to 60%. And that's due mostly to large events. There's chronic stressors for corals, but the big events are the ones that are happening closer together but causing die-off. So the mass bleaching event in 1997-98 caused the largest drop, but that's because there was the most corals to look at. So it's been holding about steady now at 5–6%. So we have a sister program that's in southeastern Florida, and that one samples 22 sites, and these maps show 9 sites because those are the long-term non-acroprid sites. And this one has been holding steady at about 3% until the disease event that you guys heard about this morning. And there we went from about 3% to 1.5%. So in a year, we lost 50% of our corals in southeast Florida. So here's just some pictures of the outbreak. We don't know what it is. As Rob Van Wozik said, we call it, white blotch disease, so not very descriptive, and also it shows differently on different corals anyway. That's not really a blotch as much as a line. It's affecting 20 different species of corals, which is unusual. It's not affecting the acroprids, but it's having a huge effect in southeast Florida down to about the lower upper Keys. The rate of tissue loss is astounding, really. This coral lost all of its tissue and is dead within a month. So we had heard that this was mentioned with the integrated mapping and monitoring programs by Cheryl Clark this morning. We know that statewide habitat monitoring is very expensive, and we only have 2 programs that we've been able to maintain for over 20 years. And through all that history, we're constantly fighting to maintain that money. There have been scares just in the last couple of years of losing all that money. There's a current scare with the president's budget to lose all of our coral funding. So we were wondering, how do we partner and leverage funding and avoid duplication? So take everybody's monitoring and everyone's mapping data and put it in one place. And so our IMP programs provide quantity, so mapping, and quality monitoring data of certain habitats. And this delivers a regional baseline on extent, status, and trends information. I know that the managers, who this is focused on how management and science merge, used especially our seagrass integrated mapping and monitoring program during the oil spill. It gave the baseline of what seagrass we had and where, especially up in the Panhandle. So Laura Yarborough and Paul Carlson started the seagrass integrated mapping and monitoring program in 2009 with money from DEP, and they've kept it going over the years with money from SWIG and money from NIFWIF. And they use this program combines the mapping data from many sources with in-water seagrass and water quality monitoring. So this map shows the Big Bend region, and you can see the dark green is continuous and the light green is patchy. And this is 2006 data. We now have 2015 aerial imagery that's being photo interpreted. So this will show our mapping data, the extent of what we have. And then this is our in-water mapping, our in-water monitoring data that shows the different species and how in the last 10 years that all the species have gone down. So the mapping wouldn't necessarily show the species composition, it wouldn't show the quality, and it's not as accurate as picking up patchy, so showing all of it going down, all of the different species going down. So the combination of the two really gives you a good picture of what's happening. So SIM has put out 2 technical reports. The second one, I think in 2016 or 15, and it is served on the web there, and all these presentations will be up, so you guys will have that address. And it constantly updates the chapters as new information comes in. So it's 44 authors, and each author or set of authors writes their own estuary or subregion up, and we combine them and edit them and help with the regions that don't have any sort of seagrass research presence. But we do an overall general assessment, the geographic extent, the mapping, monitoring, management, and restoration recommendations. And then we do an in-depth assessment in seagrass report card. So that shows, like Holly did this morning, if things are yellow, green, red. And we go from the Florida coastal waters from Perdido Bay to northern Indian River Lagoon, so where all the seagrasses are. So since this is a talk about where seagrasses are, there are about 2.5 million acres of coastal seagrasses. There are more offshore that we have a much harder time mapping. But you can see that about 25% are in the Big Bend Springs Coast region, and about 65% are in South Florida. And that's from 2014. So the report also looks at the trends, and you can see here, over here, Indian River Lagoon actually has a positive trend in 2015 because, as you saw from the data this morning, it was going up from the crash in 2011. It really didn't have much to go but up, but now it would be red again when we get that data in because it's going down because of the bloom. So Big Bend is having some major water quality issues, and then South Florida had the drought and the die-off in Florida Bay. But the southwest coast where we are is looking good. So we also look at what is causing these increases or decreases, usually decreases, and you can see they're pretty much all water quality related. So we have a lot of runoff and then some harmful algal blooms. So building on our success of SIM, we wanted our coastal wetlands program led by Ryan and Kara Radabal. They started the Coastal Habitat Integrated Mapping and Monitoring Program because we didn't really have a good idea of what was happening with our mangroves. In fact, our director asked Kara, how many mangroves do we have in the state of Florida? And it took her 2 days to answer that question. So mapping, although it comes from many different sources, it's easier to map mangroves and salt marsh than it is seagrass or especially oysters. But the monitoring methodology is all over the place. So this program really focused on looking at what the monitoring methodology should be for which systems. And so they also have a technical report that was just published in the last couple of months. We have some hard copies, I think, and then it's also served on the web. And this one had 48 statewide contributors, and the regional chapters go through history and ecology, mapping, threats, a summary of the programs, and then recommendations for future protections. It did not have a report card because, again, seagrass mapping and monitoring has been happening quite a bit longer than this program is really the first one to look comprehensively at mangroves and salt marsh. So as we go forward, we might put in a report card, but right now there just wasn't enough data for it. But one of the findings that they did really look at was mangrove encroachment. I'm sure you guys all know this anecdotally, but in the past 30 years, mangrove extent has increased by 12%, and salt marsh extent has decreased by 22%. So there is a total decrease of coastal wetlands by 4%, but the mangrove to salt marsh ratio has really switched. So mangrove encroachment can be driven by less frequent and severe cold events, sea level rise, and altered surface water hydrology. So you can see there are about 1 million acres of coastal wetland habitat. And here's an example from Northeast Florida. You can see that in about 1995, that mangroves started increasing and salt marshes slowly decreasing by the same acreage that mangrove is increasing for the most part. And you can see as it moves northward, mangroves do. So while they were doing their workshopping and writing up the report for chimp, people kept saying, what about oysters? So Ryan and Kara and then Steve Geiger, our oyster expert, have started the OIM program, or I think they say it a different way. And they've so far had their first workshop, and they've had 68 attendees, and they're combining their mapping and monitoring programs to see what we have out there. The mapping seems to be very tricky, especially in the intertidal. And so that report will be coming out in probably 2 to 3 years. All of our programs are about 3 to 4 years. So if we don't have the ability to pay for all these long-term monitoring programs, or even to do a specific targeted program per habitat, how do we identify the gaps in mapping and monitoring for all habitat and species in Florida? And we want to continue on with our goal of avoiding duplication and increasing coordination. So I know that during the session this morning, Jen Moore was saying how managers really need to know what data is out there and who to contact, or even better to have the data, but that is a lot of work. So we decided that we would do information sharing without sharing the data. So we came up with these metadata catalogs. DEP has started the WaterCat, which looks at water quality and quantity monitoring. So that's funded by them and by our state wildlife grant program. And at FWC, we decided that we wanted to also include species and habitat monitoring. So we're hoping that everyone puts their data in there, and then when you're looking for a specific type of monitoring, either for species, terrestrial, habitat, anything that's going on in the state, you'll have a picture of what's happening. And so these are our program contacts if you want to talk to any of them about our program. And I don't know how much time I have. 2 minutes, all right. Does anyone have any questions?
There is time for questions.
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little more on what the water quality issues are up in the Panhandle? Because we'd like to say that it's one of the better, less impacted places. So I was quite horrified to see those bright red dots up in my neck of the woods.
Sure, Sandra. So Paul would definitely be the person to ask for that. He's doing a big NIFWIF seagrass planning, like a $2 million grant. So they're getting to that. But I would say from what he's told me, a lot of it is Swanee runoff. It's been very turbid water. And it's sort of, even Horseshoe West has been going down and becoming much more patchy and having a lot more bare pieces. It's just been gradually going down. And so they think that it's the river runoff. And he has more, I mean, they're coming up with a whole list of very specific actions to take. So probably in the next year, there'll be very, very specific answer to your question.
All right, thank you.
I don't know. Oh, yes.
So is Paul's
Richard.
project, does that go all the way up through Pensacola Bay too?
Does it go? Yes. I think it goes from Pensacola down to, I don't think it came all the way down to Anclote, but close. Perdido to Anclote, yes, sorry. Yes.
Any insights in regards to hurricane impacts to the northern Indian River Lagoon area with all the seagrass loss and all that?
Who was I just talking to about that? Rob, was that you we were talking to? I don't know. We don't do a whole lot over at Indian River Lagoon. Our partners do, but I think that they will be looking at that. We have looked at the corals. We were on those coral cruises, and we've done Florida Bay, but we have not done Indian River Lagoon.
Florida Bay.
She was saying that Lori Morris would be the ones who would be looking at the Indian River Lagoon from the Water Management District. So in Florida Bay, you'll have to wait for Jim's presentation next.
There you go.
Well, no, you have to ask Benny. Right.
Anyone else?
Everyone, maybe I missed this. So I'm really excited about all this stuff So is the objective to have like a standardized mapping process for the whole state?
Well,
All the M's and the M's?
yes, and I think that we have certainly gotten there for seagrass. Paul has really pushed that and has gotten a very good methodology for that. We do have, for coastal wetlands, we do have that with the land cover, right? The land cover maps. So they're getting better and better. Oysters, yes, that's definitely one of the objectives, is to get some sort of standardized mapping for intertidal and subtidal. Anything else? Okay.
Okay. Thank you. We'll have a brief changeover. So I'm Jim Forkin from Florida International University. I'm going to be having a presentation today, and I've included Penny Hall and Brad Furman from FWRI. They have sent me slides, but have never seen anything I'm about to show you or heard what I was going to say. So if I kill their information, it's my fault, not theirs, and they're in the room to correct me. Thank you very much. So I also have way too many slides. Let me say first that seagrasses are really cool. Seagrasses are really poorly known around the world. So worldwide, there are about 172,000 square kilometers of mapped seagrass. But we think at a minimum, professional opinion is there's probably 300,000. Twice as many square hectares have been mapped, and there could be up to 600,000. So really, we have an estimate of the number of seagrasses plus or minus about 75%, so on a worldwide basis. And you'd be surprised to know that in Florida, we're not a whole lot better than that. Seagrasses are being lost at a very